parents have read it. How did your son or daughter's significant other win you over? Story 1. Read the question wrong, so here's my real answer. I'm a martial arts instructor, among other things. I caught my daughter's boyfriend looking at my belt rack, 5th-degree black belt and trophies, from when I was much younger, and he said, "Are all those yours?" "Yup." "So you know how to throw someone?" "Yup." "Could you teach me?" How much of a setup did I need? I took him into the backyard and threw his skinny ass around for about 45 minutes, and every time he hit the ground, he got back up with a huge smile and said, "That was awesome. Show me how." So I took him to my class with my daughter and had her practice throws on him. He never complained, never flinched, and never bitched. After class, I told my daughter I liked him, so she broke up with him. Story 2. Not a parent, but a sister who is fiercely protective of her brothers. My eldest brother's partner was terrified of me. I'm quite aloof, I get it. The defining moment of my coming to love her was when we visited the zoo. On the way in, she saw a little girl getting a butterfly face painted on her. She, aged 28, wanted the same thing. My brother said no way, don't be ridiculous, etc. She said nothing more about it and just went about her day. An hour or two later, she went to the bathroom. She took a while. She returned with a butterfly on her face and the biggest smile I've ever seen. Her managing to cause this total look of despair but also love on my brother's face was the moment. Just in case you're wondering, my brother is not a control freak. It was a cutesy, flirtatious kind of behavior in both their parts. No need to raise alarm bells. Story 3. My parents are pretty traditional and really like the idea of any potential boyfriends asking my dad's permission to date me. However, after 3 years of undergrad, living away from home, and inevitable casual boyfriends, they had kind of come to accept that this was not going to happen. I made this joke after a one-night stand made it clear he wanted to date me. We went on a few dates and things were progressing well. However, I was surprised one day to hear that my father and brother were coming to visit the city for a day. Turns out this guy had contacted my brother on Facebook and was taking him and my father out to lunch to ask permission to date me. This one-night stand is now my husband. Story 4. I know the exact moment I won my wife's family over. I could see it in her father's eyes. It was high school before we started dating. The first time I went over to her house, actually. Her father and 2 brothers are all pretty tall, and I am average height. It's a very alpha male household, and they had this thing where they like to do to potential boyfriends. So when my wife left the room to go to the bathroom or whatever, all 3 of them stood, lined up shoulder to shoulder, and loomed over me. Blank-faced, glaring down, no words, no motion, just staring and looming. I found out later that her last boyfriend almost cried when they did this to him. I've always been really socially awkward, but an odd part of that awkwardness is that I'm never intimidated by people. I don't know why, but they just don't frighten me. I slowly stood up, looked them all in the eye, and then poked her dad right in the tummy. I said, "Boop." He stared for a second, then a giant grin split his face. It turns out that he's a massive goofball. From that moment on, I was a member of the family. The whole dating and marriage thing was just a formality to them. Story 5. I'll tell you the story of how my husband won over my dad. My dad has a sailboat, which he's kind of crazy about. My husband has a background in naval architecture. We went to visit my dad, and while we were on his boat in the marina, the guy on the slip next to us runs over. "My boat is taking on water," he says. "Come help me bail it out." "Don't worry," responds my father. "My son-in-law is a naval architect." Something to note at this point in the story, my now husband and I had only been dating for like 8 months. We weren't even close to getting engaged, let alone married. But now all of a sudden, boyfriend is his son-in-law. So now husband just goes with it. "Sure, the son-in-law will see if I can help." He gets on the guy's boat and sees that there's water seeping through the floorboards. He thinks this is weird, given that the pump is going and the boat isn't listing or anything. So he gets down, sticks his finger in the water, and licks it. It's fresh water. Now husband says, "Your bilge is leaking. Did you remember to turn off the hose after you finished filling up your fresh water tank?" And that, my friends, is how my husband became a legend in Dad's marina, and my dad's favorite person of all time. Ew, he licked bilge water? Story 6. My now husband, David, and I met online, and we were in a long-distance relationship while I was in college near Duluth, Minnesota. We had never met in person before, and I invited him to come see me. I told my mom about the meeting, and she was really paranoid. "Call me every day so I know you're alive," type of thing. He came and we really hit it off, and we're having a lot of fun. After day 2, Mom was convinced that he at least wasn't an axe murderer, and after a couple of more days, I decided that I was into him enough that he should meet my parents. I know, poor guy, but this was a good thing in the long run, so I invited them up on that Saturday. They picked us up and we all went out to lunch and made some polite conversation. We decided we should take a small trip to Split Rock Lighthouse. a famous lighthouse on Lake Superior about an hour from Duluth. I remembered that I left my camera in my dorm, so we swung by so I could pick it up. I left David in the car with my folks, alone for just a few minutes. While I was gone, my dad joked, "Quick, let's drive off." To which David, who has a very sarcastic dry wit, responded, "I knew that one way or another this trip would end with me dead in the woods." There was a shocked pause, and then my parents started cracking up. When I returned, it was clear the ice had broken, and they relayed what had been said to me. My mom was like, "I think he'll fit right in." She often relayed this story, characterizing it as the moment she decided that David was right for me. Luckily, I agree. Story 7. My mom didn't like my partner at all first. I went to college, broke up with a boyfriend I had back home that she loved, and moved in with a guy she didn't approve of because of his religion, and she thought he was dark and evil. He's pagan and probably the nicest guy I know. Then one day, he and I drove to their house to tell them the news that they didn't want to hear. I was pregnant. Mom cried and told me I ruined my life, and my normally quiet boyfriend got angry and stood up to her saying, "Why would you say that to her? She never wanted to be in college anyway. It's better that she has to drop out early on than spend her life in debt doing something you forced her to do. Her life isn't over just because she's staying in college." No one had ever stood up to my mom before, and from that moment on, she had a ton of respect for him. Now she absolutely loves him. I was expecting World War III. You don't have to go to college to be considered doing something with your life. Just because someone is pagan doesn't mean they're evil. And the expecting World War III jokes were funny the first time. Then you all beat it like a dead horse. World War III is a strange name for a child. Story 8. I don't know when it happened for sure, but the moment I honestly felt accepted by my partner's family was when we had just gotten back from our very first road trip together. We drove to Miami from Houston and stayed at SeaWorld Hotel next to Universal Studios. Anyways, I was having a beer and shooting pool with her dad and grandpa, when suddenly her dad looks at me and says, "You know you're the first boyfriend to make it through a vacation with my daughter, and still be in love with her when you get back." I wasn't surprised after the trip I just had, but he was right. I still loved her, and that had only grown through the past vacation. He asked what the worst part was, and I told him it was when my girlfriend, his daughter, had wanted to do something and I told her no, because it wasn't a good idea. The look of utter shock on his face was unexpected. Then her grandpa chimed in, the same look of shock. "You told her no?" Then her dad goes, "And lived?" Then they started laughing, and instead of asking me to get the beer, her dad handed me one. I felt respected a bit, and at the least accepted as a man within her family. Clarification on girlfriend's behavior. The reason for the shock was that she never had a boyfriend that stood up to her. They were glad I wasn't a pushover, that's all. Her mother also commented to her, she told me about it after the fact, that I have the patience of a saint. Her actions on the trip, first off, let me explain a bit. My partner is a very high-strung individual who has had traumatic events take place in her past. She has a script, now for high anxiety, legitimately attained after blood work and has regular meetings with her physician. She imagined being with a still relatively new boyfriend who'd only known each other for about 6 months away from home, and on a very busy highway that passes through small towns in backwoods Alabama and Florida. Very stressful for anyone. But throw in the fact that she wasn't yet on medication for her imbalance, she was having a rough time with things. Metaphorical example of the problems we fought about until we both broke down and had a heart-to-heart at the end of the week, which is where we calmly sat and discussed what was really bothering us. We're standing in a field of yellow daisies, sunny out, good mild weather, when she would decide the daisies should have been tulips, and then it's my fault we didn't find the right field. Again, the metaphor shows how pointless the fight was, and I did not help the situation at all. When dealing with things that bother me, especially if it's someone I care for, I will put up a wall of asshole. Seriously, I get mean when I'm frustrated. She's anxious over nothing and thus adds to the storm. Not pretty. We are now settled in quite well and have been together for 3 years, living in the same apartment for a year and a half. Yeah, sometimes we fight over silly things, but in the end, we always find a solution to the problem and then put it into action. She learned that when I do voice a no, it's because of a good reason and no longer questions it. In turn, I show respect and do the same. If it confuses one of us, we ask later when we are at home and calm. I love this woman, and I'm secretly working on a way to propose to her. That is all. Story 9. I'm the significant other of the daughter in this story. My girlfriend's dad basically hated me until the time we drove together down to Monterey from Austin and had to make conversation for 7 hours and pretended it wasn't awkward. He's an engineer, so I went with that and casually mentioned my desire to get a small CNC lathe for metal fabrication, or possibly build a basic XY controller to attach to a traditional lathe. Turns out his final project for graduation at college was to build a CNC lathe. We nerded out and started discussing the pros and cons of stepper motors versus servos. Then the conversation moved to Arduinos, and the rest is history. Now we get along handsomely.
and it makes my girlfriend very uncomfortable. Story 10. I am a white American man married to a Japanese woman. Here's the story of how I won over her dad, then got him to hate me, then won him back. While we were dating, I was living and working in Japan, and I won over her dad because I could tell puns in Japanese, his favorite style of humor. And because we share common interests in films and music, we also just got along well in general. However, he was very old-fashioned, and so my then-girlfriend opted to not ever tell him that we were officially dating, even though it was obvious. The company ended up transferring me to Canada, so my girlfriend and I decided to get married in a hurry so she could go with me. When we announced this to her dad, his eyes instantly turned red as he realized his daughter was leaving the house in the country. Tearfully, he asked me what my plans were for my career, how I would take care of her, etc. Somehow, none of my answers seemed to please him. The night ended with me feeling like I had f***ed up pretty badly. He didn't speak to me for more than 3 weeks, and I knew he resented me for taking his daughter. Then my parents and 3 of my siblings came to Japan to be there when we signed the legal marriage documents, even though we were planning to have a real wedding 1 year later. Both families got together for a fancy, and my family saved my ass. They brought gifts for my future in-laws, told stories and jokes, and treated them like royalty. My future in-laws loved my family, and by the end of the week, I was newly married, and my new wife's father treated me like a son of his own. We had gotten along famously ever since, and I credit that all to my amazing parents, brothers, and sisters. Funny end note. We had a real wedding 1 year later at my home in Chicago. My wife's father's speech ended up being the highlight of the night. It went something like this. Paraphrasing, 150 years ago, Admiral Perry of the U.S. Navy came to Japan, pointed his ship's cannons at Tokyo, and demanded that Japan open itself to the West for trade. In much the same way, James came into our lives and pointed his cannons at my family. But just as the U.S. and Japan came to be close allies and friends, so too has James grown to be a close friend and member of our family. Everyone told me it was the best part of the wedding. Story 11. Not a parent, but how I won my in-laws over was pretty harrowing and funny. My wife and I knew each other for years, but having done the long-distance thing, I didn't meet her family until we eloped. I met the in-laws the day before the wedding. Due to the madness, though, I didn't get to know them until a short while later. Visiting them for the weekend, my wife's mom said I could help myself to anything in the fridge. Me, my wife, and her brothers went out drinking, and when I came back, they urged me to take liberties with any leftovers, which I, of course, had no problem with. Stumbling upon a bag full of bacon, the shit was equivocal to manna from heaven. Unbeknownst to me, though, my mom-in-law had cooked it in preparation for one of her kids' graduation parties the next day. I had the misfortune of seeing her wake up, walk to the fridge, discover that I'd eaten all of her bacon, and start bawling. She was so stressed about the party that this was the straw that broke the mother-in-law's back. It was my first real impression of her, and I had done f***ed up. The rest of the family was really cool about it and assured me she would get over it. I felt terrible about it, though. The next time I visited them, I didn't say anything about it. Still too fresh. But I wore a shirt I made that had big bold letters saying, "Sorry I ate your bacon." We've bonded over the trauma ever since. Story 12. This is a story from my significant other's parents. It was the first year of university and was still summery outside. Every night for the first week here was drinking and partying in the quad and in the dorms. Well, at the time, I had met my partner once in the hallway, and that was it. Well, one night she goes out and gets blasted because her previous boyfriend was always partying despite her protests. While she nearly died of alcohol poisoning that night, she was rushed off to the hospital for detox and such. I had no idea this had happened. I only saw the ambulance pull up to my dorm building. The next morning around 5 a.m., she was knocking on my door still inebriated from the night before. I didn't understand anything she was saying because she just kept saying she woke up in a room, locked to a bed, with needles in her arm, and a thick Slovakian accent too. She failed to mention she was at the hospital. So I led her into my dorm, sat her on my bed, made her a cup of Earl Grey, put Tarzan on my telly, and had her watch it. Then I slowly tracked down her phone, wallet, and keys she had lost all over campus the night before. Then I bought her a giant 2-liter bottle of water and food. I brought her to her room and gave her the food and then some Advil. She told her parents all this, and they were very happy someone had helped her. Later that week, she started inviting me everywhere, and we eventually became best friends and then even more than that. Well, Christmas break rolls around and she left before me to go skiing with her family. I was texting her, asking where she and her family were skiing. They were at a mountain not far away. I asked her how happy she would be if I came the next day. She was thrilled, but thought I was blowing hot air. To her surprise, I was at her lodge the next day after a 12-hour bus ride. She couldn't believe it, and her parents were impressed that I went through all that trouble. I spent the next 3 days skiing and got to Hot Springs. Then I bussed back to the university to finish my last final. 3 years later, I am still with her, and her parents still highly approve of me for all the things I do for her. Sorry for the wall of text, but it's a big story. Story 13. I have parents that are narcissistic. Not the worst out there, but they have their issues. primarily along the lines of self-absorption, father, and emotional abuse, mother. They were so cruel to my ex that he started having anxiety attacks around them, and his only crime was that he was shy. They were not the reason we broke up after 5 years in an engagement, but the stress they caused was definitely a contributing factor. So a new boyfriend shows up, he's warned in advance, and all the usual smiling passive-aggressive insults start. It takes him one session to realize what I had been talking about. And he's got his defenses. I'm so nice, how could you not love me? The play going, but nothing is working. My dad thinks he's God's gift to every single one of you, and you're lucky to have him. Unfortunately, he pretty much had it all. Tall, good-looking, fairly intelligent, charismatic, funny, and 2 parents who both retired young and spoiled him. He still thinks of himself as that amazing 20-year-old stud muffin and has the maturity and usefulness of such. So it's been 6 months and it's Easter. We're celebrating in typical WASP style, with some family we all hate but invite anyway, and my partner. To keep the demon children, one used to follow my ex around saying, "I hate you, you're going to die." She was 11. As far away from the kitchen as possible. My mother had bought cheap little 6-shooter Nerf guns and told us all to go outside and shoot each other. 2 teams were made and I preferred to watch, as inevitably every match came down to my partner and my younger brother, who I love very much and who is awesome, despite him being our parents' golden child. Seeing them take it way too seriously, dodging behind cars and shouting elaborate insults was much fun. Meanwhile, the demon female cousin would just stand next to my boyfriend and shoot him repeatedly in the face. We'd think she had a crush. Everyone heads in with dad in front of us and us 2 lagging in the rear. For reasons I still can't explain, boyfriend shoots his Nerf gun in the air, stands under it and tries to get it on his glasses. Misses, tries again, right as dad is turning around. This time the dart goes straight up and down and hits the glasses square on. When he looks back down, he's got the suction cup dart sticking on there. My dad explodes with shock, awe, and respect. That is obviously the coolest trick shot ever in the history of Nerf trick shots. He goes tearing into the house to tell my mother all about it, even though she's sweating over a stove and could care less. He grilled my boyfriend about it and reenacted it at the Easter dinner table. For months, if my significant other was being introduced to someone new, Dad told him the story of the coolest shot he had ever seen, which is probably not the worst first impression to give someone, but still. He brought it up at our wedding and recently told me my husband is his favorite child. My mother came around because he fixes stuff while my dad is useless. Story 14. Probably too late to join, but this is a great story. We hated her daughter's boyfriend before we even met him. She's a high-achieving, beautiful girl, the smartest of all my kids, the apple of her dad's eye. She began dating a guy 8 years older, had no education after high school, still living at home with his parents. He was covered in tattoos, was a longtime smoker, no career plans in sight. My daughter was 19 at the time and well headed to med school. After meeting him, she told us she was dropping out of college. Talk about parents' worst nightmare. Her only daughter. Turns out she had been seriously stressed for a number of years, trying to keep up with family and parental expectations, working toward a career she had no interest in, and suffering from severe depression. This guy listened and supported her, and when she decided to end it all, he was the one who found her and saved her life. Spend a few days in the ICU with your kid struggling for her life, with her boyfriend constantly beside her talking, caring, touching her even though in her coma she probably couldn't hear him. Watch him support her through the horrible days that followed, with a memory loss and severe mood swings and continued depression. See your daughter grow stronger through the steady support of someone who believes totally in her value and loves her for who she is, not who he wants her to be. After those weeks, even months, you'll see the tattoos don't matter. Education doesn't matter, and life circumstances don't matter. What matters is that someone knows and loves your child. Her partner is still a part of our family, even though they're no longer together. He turned out to be a wonderful person with many qualities that are rare in today's world. I learned an important lesson about judgment through our relationship with him. Story 15. Telling this story from my perspective and how I kind of got in with my now father-in-law at the time. I was a bartender at the sushi restaurant in San Diego, and the bar was attached to the sushi bar too. So oftentimes I would exchange drinks with the sushi chefs for sushi. This happened for a couple of months to the point where there was a pretty good thing going off of being drunk on the job and getting our fill of sushi. So I was BFFs with one of the chefs, older guy. We'd hang out all the time during work, make jokes, drink afterward, and call it a day. Well, I started seeing this girl, now wife, and suggested she come visit me while I'm working at the bar so I could comp her a drink, and so she does. Little did I know that my drinking buddy and owner of ultra-sharp knives was apparently her father. As she walks in, he yells, "Hey babe, come to visit your pops?" As she replied, "No, actually here to see..." There was a moment of silence, followed by, "All right, that's great. I love this guy." And now I'm regarded as the son he never had.